to this week's episode of Dose Chais. I'm your host, Efren, and here with me always is Cooper.
What's happening?
I hope you guys have been well. Thanks again for the listeners who got on there and subscribed. I'm still trying to work with the Apple. It's going crazy, but I'll get it resolved hopefully in the next little bit. Since we ended up last episode on our episode of a lyric, about the best of your todays. May the best of your todays be the worst of your tomorrows. No. Yeah, best of the days by Jay-Z. I thought with the way the world is that we should pick and do another one. Coop and I, we love Sam Cooke, and there's a great song he does called A Change Is Gonna Come. So I think that's, maybe we'll use the lyric, it's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh yes, it will. So I know in this week of our world that we live in, we had presidential candidate Joe Biden drop out with 104 days before the election. We were just kind of sort of, talking about how that's gonna impact the way that the world is and the way that the DNC will be and stuff. And we were talking about, ironically enough, just before we started recording, is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? I know for those who are history fans, I know they were in '68 in Chicago when they had a broker convention and all the stuff that came out, all the riots and stuff. And a lot of it was protests in Vietnam. It was very divisive, like it is now to a certain extent. So we were just kind of sort of wanting like we said earlier, the history be, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. I don't know about repeating it, but there's a definite rhythm to it that way. So be curious to know. Coop, what's your thought on that? Good, bad, and different?
I think if you don't like the pace, stick around. It's going to change. So don't get used to it. And I just think it's like we can stop and reflect. And I don't just think about Biden dropping out. I think about the attempted assassination on Trump last weekend. Mm-hmm. And I just think that we are in a place in our country's history where the tension has risen and people keep thinking like it's never been like this before. But then you think about the 60s and you think about JFK, mm-hmm. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy.
There's a lot happened. Yeah.
Assassination attempt on George Wallace. So we've seen this type of tension before. But I think it feels different because of the way the media covers it today.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely more in your face.
Yeah, it feels different, but I think if we talk to some of those boomers, they'd be like, man, this is just a repeat episode. And you just think that hopefully as a country, no matter what happens in November, we're mature enough to carry on and behave like civil people.
Yeah, you would hope. I think the only fear that I have is, because I know you and I have spoken before in the past, if Obama never happened in 2008, would we have the wild swing that we have now because of, this is the adverse reaction, to that progressiveness that we had. So let's just say the potential nominee for the Democratic Party could be Vice President Harris. If she ends up winning, do you think it swings harder to the right to counteract an African-American woman as president?
I don't know. In a lot of ways, this is different because of the candidate of Trump.
Oh, yeah.
And I think everybody got used to the idea of Biden versus Trump, mm-hmm. and both of them being older.
Oh, yeah.
So now I think that they're legitimately watching. I apologize because I don't mean this disrespectfully to President Biden, but watching his decline, there has to be reasonable Americans watching that and thinking like Donald Trump is close to that age. So it might be a reasonable response to say, I'm going to vote for her because she's younger.
Oh, yeah, because she's 59.
Yeah, somebody pointed out that John McCain was also older. But I guess John McCain was still so articulate that it wasn't as noticeable when he ran against Obama. And so I think that the response for Harris' presidency, because she's not the first, might be a little bit more reasoned than Obama's. And we also got to face the reality that the country has to be tired of all the tension. So in some ways, I think Donald Trump missed a huge opportunity last Thursday. And when I say that, I mean the 18th, when he spoke at the RNC and he had an opportunity to unite the country.
Oh yeah.
He could have said, this person who was insane got his hands on a gun. And maybe we need to reconsider mental health checks about guns. Mm-hmm. And maybe he could have said, like, man, this thing has gotten so bad that somebody take a shot at me. We, the whole country, need to stop taking shots. But no, he called Nancy Pelosi crazy Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, all the names and stuff.
Yeah, and he went back to the ranting. And I'm like, he had an opportunity to unify the country, and he chose not to.
Yeah, but you stop and think, you get somebody like that who does swing to the side of common sense. And I hate even saying it like that. But I mean, you get recent history. You get someone like John Boehner, who worked with the center. He worked with the Democrats. He came to the center, and he lost his job. You get somebody like, Kevin McCarthy, who did that way. He worked with the other side to get the continuing resolution passed, and they let him go. So it's like, would the fear of if Trump took too much of a centrist standpoint of not calling people names and say, hey, look, we need to unify the country, move past this, maybe we get, for common ground, would it lose votes that are passionate on, no, you guys say the right because that's what we want you to say to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny that you said that John Boehner and Kevin McCarthy came back to the center, but in reality, the left moved toward the right to help them compromise.
Yeah, however you want to describe
both of those guys are like Tea Party, which for a long time was considered far right. It's just that MAGA has become far right. But yeah, I understand that. But I do think that at some point, and I think we're seeing this in Poland that people aren't paying attention to, but the reason why Donald Trump and Joe Biden's numbers were still so low is because I think that older boomers are tired of all the bickering. So I think that group is kind of turned sour on both of those guys, which is crazy because those are probably people more closely aligned to their age, their contemporaries, who are like, guys, this is too much.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, too, what the polling age of these kids are, that they're going and doing. How much is it? Are they closer to, our kids' age? Are they, the 15 to 18-year-olds? Are they just now first-time voters? Are they just turned 18 in the last 4-year cycle that are now ready to vote and stuff like that way? So I wonder, I'd be curious to know what the polling ages are that way, because I think the younger kids or the younger generations are tired of the antics and stuff of the bickering, the name calling, because they want somebody to be a leader. They want somebody to unify the country.
Most traditional polls miss young people. So they don't know. Normally polls are super, not inaccurate, but inaccurate in the point that my kids don't answer their phone.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Even if they recognize somebody, I'll call one of my daughters and they'll text me back. I'm like, hey, I just called you. And they're like, oh, yeah, what do you need? And I'm like, no, I need to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're a young person and you answer the phone and somebody's like, hey, do you have 20 minutes for me to ask you questions? They're going to hang up. So, but I do think that young people's issues today, I mean, if you talk to an average American about AI, older Americans are a little fearful. Younger Americans see opportunity. So I think that some of that polling aspect of it, I'm like, I don't know how accurate it is. But what we do know is when it comes to voting in every single election, older Americans lead the way. So I think the Democrats take a risk of alienating voters by saying Joe Biden's too old. So if you're a 75-year-old or an 80-year-old sitting at home and saying, wow, the Democratic Party just said they don't value Joe Biden because of his age. And that's why if I'm the DNC, I'm pushing the fact that Joe Biden wasn't physically well and COVID has taken a toll. I think I read somewhere this is his third time having COVID.
Yeah, correct.
So I can just imagine. And again, age is weird, man. Like, people don't know this if you don't know me well, but I think Michael Jordan's the GOAT. But on Saturday, I saw 39-year-old LeBron James put the United States Olympic team on his back. And I'm like, at 39, this isn't like a center who is slowing in the post and doing sky hooks. This man is dribbling, creating, playing at his absolute best. So I'm saying that if Joe Biden at any point in the last month would have gotten in front of a TV and put on a LeBron-esque performance, I think a lot of people would have felt differently. But it seems like every time he stepped up, and I understand I grew up with a stutter, so I understand the stutter, but it was more than just that. It just seems like the spark or something is gone. And I think there are older Americans still doing jobs fantastically, but we all know that the presidency puts age on you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things. If they had come out and said, "Hey, the physical demands of the office he can't keep up with it anymore," that's better than saying he's too old. Because you're right, it does give a bad context of, well, wait a minute, if they're going to just put him out in the pasture, what about the rest of us who are in that same age bracket and stuff with that way? But then also too, that's something that a lot of people that I know and speak in the circle is like, out of all the representatives and the mixtures of people that we have in the races and the orientations and creeds and what we have here in the United States, these are the best two people representing half of the the political parties. These two guys, I mean, you can have it that way, but then it's that weird thing of you want a young, virile person to run for political office, but you want them to have experience. Well, how do they get experience if you don't vote for them? So it's that weird cycle of, yeah, I'd love to have a young 40, 50-year-old person, be in the presidency and run it that way. I would harken back to days of like JFK. People were so excited because he would be the youngest one to run and win. And it was great, but it was how many people didn't care for what he was because he was too young. He was inexperienced and stuff that way. So it's a very weird thing because, I'm 46. I don't know if I've learned enough in my 46 years of being on this earth to know everything. I mean, if I had someone who was at 50, going to have that experience to be a leader of the United States, leader of a country of the world, I don't know, man. That makes it hard pressed.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that both Biden and Trump realize that. So it's weird. The last 24 hours, I've seen a whole bunch of videos of like Kamala Harris dancing, and you seeing all her youthful energy.
Yeah.
And then J.D. Vance is 39. And again, I'm like, I saw J.D. Vance speaking maybe yesterday, and he had his sports coat off, and he had his tie loosened up, and he was more energetic. And I'm like, Donald Trump has energy for a guy in his late 70s. But, I mean, I still think back to those ads in the 80s about presidents who were older and that red phone in the middle of the night. And I'm just like, I want a president who can pick up that phone, go to the West Wing and get the business done for the country, the war room or wherever he's being called to. And man, I think one of the saddest images was Saturday watching Joe Biden get off the plane in Delaware. And I said, man, his feet look sore. He looks tired. And I always think back to Washington serving those 2 terms and saying, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home and rest. And I'm not advocating for elderly people to be put in homes or anything, but I'm saying like there is a period of time where you are young and youthful, and then you mature and you go into more serious roles. But then there has to be a conversation about what those latter years look like.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you look at it as a sacrifice, that being to the, President Biden's ego didn't override his patriotism. Sure, that's great, that's fine. But at some point, you have to feel a person in that role, in that age, you need to feel comfortable in handing it off to the younger generation.
Yeah, make sure you get some good friends around you.
Yeah.
Because to me, I'm always like, I want somebody to reality check me. So if I'm doing something and I shouldn't be doing it anymore, I need a good friend to tell me, hey, put down the chips.
Oh yeah, because they have no skin in the game. They're just there to look at for your good, for your willingness to do something good.
And I'm going to say something controversial.
Go ahead, say it.
But I don't know that those people should be family members. Because
No.
I told somebody the other day, my wife is way too supportive. If I get a terrible idea, she don't want to crush me, so she's going to back me even if I look in the mirror and I see that look on her face, like, baby, this is a terrible idea. She's so loving that she's gonna push it.
Yeah.
Where you need somebody. So maybe it's not a spouse or your children. Maybe it's a sibling who understands tough love, or it's a friend who you've given permission to say, speak truth to me.
Oh yeah, yeah. You definitely need somebody because, I mean, it's like that thing. And you know, you have kids. You know, when you tell your kids to do something, they look at you, Dad, that's crazy. But you get somebody else outside of that circle, friend, you know, their friend's parents or somebody else tells them the almost word for word thing you do, just like, oh my gosh, that's the greatest piece of advice. And you're looking at them like, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I've been trying to, you know, put that in your head. Whatever. You know, if you're too close to a situation, sometimes that is a bad thing. And what way? So I mean, I get it. My wife does the same thing with me when I give her an idea, and she's looking at me like, well, yeah, go ahead and try it. And I immediately question it. It's like, well, is she giving me permission to do it because she knows it's bad? I'm gonna crash and burn hard, or is it a legitimate something that I don't feel confident about that way? But she gives me the, you know, the umph to go and do it. It doesn't. It works out well. So it's definitely a fine balance of what that response is that you get from them.
And kids are terrible at stuff like that. My kids, literally a couple of weeks ago, I'm 44, and my oldest was like, Dad, I thought you were like 31. I was like, Bella, you're 14. That means I would have been saying just that whole conversation. Like, kids see you literally as superheroes. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, a couple of years ago, like a lot of Americans, I had COVID. Mm-hmm. And my wife said my kids during COVID had a hard time dealing because they're just so used to super dad. So even when I was recovering, I was still moving slower and I was sickly. And she was like, there are nights where the kids were just like, man, I can't see dad like this.
Oh, yeah.
No, and I'm like, your kids, and I bring that up because Hunter Biden's role with Joe and Jill, I think is a unique one where it's like, I think those two probably wanted Joe Biden to stay in this race as long because their vision of him, and some people said like, oh, Joe Biden probably just wanted to continue to be first lady. I don't think it was that petty.
Oh, no. I just think because they had seen him always do well and went away. That's, I think, the hardest thing to see family members is, you know, struggle that way. I mean, because I know when my dad was sick, you know, I have an older brother, younger brother, and every time I'd see my dad, he's like, hey, how your brother's doing? I'd tell him because I'd keep it with him. I'd contact him. I'd call him and say, hey, I just saw Dad. Here's how he is. Asked about you both. Okay, here's what I'm doing. I said, okay, I won't tell him anything until I get explicit consent from you because I don't want to just be spreading your business. And that way, my younger brother, hey, you know, he hadn't seen you, wants to come see you. Yeah, okay, with that way. And then finally one day when he was getting towards the end of his life, I said something to him. I said, hey, you know, I just want to tell you again. And he finally just got upset with me. He says, why do you keep telling me that? I says, well, I just don't want you to regret missing out saying something to him or having some moment with him that way. And he finally broke down and said, you know what, I don't want to see him that way because I've always used to seeing him doing stuff, being strong, supporting the family, helping the family out, do it that way. I don't want to see him that way. I don't want to remember him that way. Mm-hmm. And it crystallized with me. I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, apologize. I said, why I apologize for trying to force it onto you? I says, no, you're not trying to force it onto me. It's just, I just should have been more honest with you earlier to know this is why. And it made sense to me. And I didn't realize that because it was something I was trying to fight with him because it was I didn't want to feel guilty about having something left unsaid. So I was trying to put that on my siblings and whatnot.
They say it all the time in sports, but we don't hear it enough in regular life. But Father Time is undefeated.
Oh, every time.
So, I mean, watching LeBron James, like watching the gray in the beard and the thinning in the hair, you think like, man, when that guy came into the league, he was a kid.
Yeah.
And in some ways, as somebody who's aged with him, we were all kids.
Oh, yeah.
And now you look at LeBron and you go, man, he's lost a step. And then you look in the mirror and you go, ooh.
Yeah. Oh,
we've all lost a step.
Because I mean, you stop and think contemporaries in his class, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, are both several years removed from retiring from the league. And yet he's still going. I mean, he's getting ready to play his third or fourth Olympic team.
Fourth.
And stuff.
2 golds and a bronze. So.
Yeah, so you stop and think. I mean, that's every 4 years. So that's 16 years of his life, 20 years. Yeah, 16 years of his life. He's now, been in the Olympic circle and stuff that way. So that's crazy to stop and think. Someone like Steph Curry, who's been in the league since 2008.
This is his first Olympics.
Yeah.
Yeah. They just announced this afternoon that LeBron's going to be the flag bearer on Saturday because of the fact that he's been around. And it's just like, mean, to take it out of sports and put it back in politics, man, we've all worked in jobs where you've seen an older colleague who's committed their entire life to that craft, but then they're heading toward retirement. And you want to honor them and respect them through that process. But then you start saying, like, man, it might be time. And you don't want to push them out because you want to honor and respect them because you love them and you appreciate what they've contributed to the process. But Father Time, I mean, there's going to come that time where it's just like, it's time. And I think that I don't think anybody's to blame for what's going on right now with the Democratic Party. But I do think that I'm going to, like, I don't care if it's an incumbent. There should be a primary process where you get to see your candidate engage in debate and campaigning.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I think in 2020, it was different because of COVID. So I think in 2020, I mean, because of COVID and the risk of COVID, the Democrats really respected the process and there was not a lot of campaigning traditional style.
Oh, yeah.
So there were some rallies, but because of the distance requirements and stuff, I remember one of the creative ways they did a drive-in campaign, but now we're 4 years away from that level of COVID. And I think there are signs saying like the major candidate isn't out as much as traditionally you would see candidates. And again, I think that with Joe Biden, he dreamed of being president his entire life. And he's been such a loyal party guy that not just his family, but those around him wanted to honor and respect him.
Yeah.
So nobody pushed and challenged. And it's kind of weird. I think the guy who kind of kicked this even further after the debate was George Clooney.
Which is interesting, him writing that op-ed in the New York Times or whatever it was, talking about maybe it's time to step away and stuff. And it's funny because, I mean, I'd be curious to know what the footnote in history will be if it ends up falling that, Vice President Harris ends up being the president-elect. Will they go back and credit George Clooney for making that, heroic act or patriotic act or whatever the adjective they want to put it that way? Or will he be the linchpin if it goes bad? Will they be laying the blame at his foot? It's just like, well, why'd you put that idea out there? Biden could have stayed on. He could have won. It could have been differently and stuff that way. So history will determine.
Read it, though, it wasn't disrespectful.
No, it was not.
It sounded like a grandchild or a son with a parent saying, Mom or Dad has declined and spending time with them last weekend. I'm not seeing, and he said it too, he said, I'm not seeing the same fiery Biden that I saw just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it felt more like concern. And to me, I'm like, compassion. Like at some point, it's like people had to have conversations with Joe Biden that were probably painful to say, Joe, you got to think about yourself in this moment. Like, we don't want you to go this way. And you can't compare it to anybody, but sometimes I think about FDR and, him dying in office and maybe that last time he was on the ballot were there people in his circle saying like, man, we've made it through most of the war. You've gotten us through the Depression. Maybe, Mr. President, you should step aside and let the next guy run this election. I mean, history's always going to be that what if.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But also, too, like we mentioned earlier, it's how much of that is the pride of a man going to outweigh, the need of a country. And I don't see Joe Biden as a prideful man that he's going to let his ego overrun what was better for the country. I could see other people do it that way. They're all about me and mine. But knowing that he's definitely a big historical guy, you don't want this to be the last. You had 3.5 years of a great presidency, and the last 6 months is your undoing because you just can't physically keep up with the job. You can't do it at the normal clip you want to or that you did before. That way, because how the way we live in, not for long society, the last 6 months of his presidency could go off the rails so bad that that's all they remember him for, not the good that he did, with the jobs and bringing the country out of COVID and everything else that he did for the 3.5 years he'd be in that way. You remember the last 6 months of all of his gaffes that he did,
One of those lyrics that always stick with me. Sometimes if you love it, you got to let it go. And it might be that let it go season.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, and I think that's that. I mean, I would be hard pressed if I was the leader of the free world. I mean, everyone who's ever had that job talks about how it's the greatest job they've ever had, greatest job they'll ever do, and things they miss just going into a room and having people stand up for you because it's the respect of the office and stuff that way. And I get it that way. So it'd be hard to walk away from that. But seeing the way the country needs to be moving forward, and the way that it is, and even if he did win. I mean, we're just asking a lot of him for the next, 4 more years. I mean, he'd be 85 at that point. I mean, what happens if he did die in office?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about the image of Obama on Richard Branson Island. Not that other island, but Richard Branson Island after he left the presidency. And there's a picture where he was wakeboarding. And he looked like he was genuinely enjoying himself.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm like, as much as they probably enjoy that job, the weight of that job probably takes a toll on you as well.
Oh, yeah. I remember all those great photos you see, like when Obama came in, the Yes We Can at Grant Park, dark hair, young and excited. And then in his 8-year term when he got done, how much gray he had on his hair.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked like he had aged so much in the 8-year process and stuff that way.
And last week when he was announcing the John Lewis, what do they call it? The John Lewis lobby that's going to be in the Obama library. He looked younger. It's like
yeah.
he's de-aged these last
Oh,
8
yeah.
years, being able to, I mean, the pressure of being a father
Oh,
and
yeah,
a
yeah,
husband and a leader of a party probably still puts pressure on him, but not like you said, being the leader of the free world. And
Oh, yeah, yeah. But now also, too, he can pick and choose what obligations he wants to be a part of, how much he wants to be involved in the political world. If his wife has aspirations, I would be curious to know because I've heard a lot of people kicking her name around, Michelle Obama, as being the
it'll
running mate.
never happen.
That way. But I think people would be shocked if she did end up ever in her life having political aspirations. I don't see him being out there with her, just from the standpoint of that he wouldn't want to be the one that they're voting for her because of him. And I don't think he'd do that way. He wouldn't want to be you go out there on your own merits, your own credence, your own relation, because it's you they're voting for. It's not associated with me you're voting for that way. So I don't think he'd be out there. And I don't know if she aspires to that. A lot of wives usually don't, or spouses don't do that when their spouse gets into politics. They don't want that.
Yeah, in her book, she talked about after being first lady, she feels like she's allowed to pursue passions that she really cares about.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I bet you having that autonomy to do what you want and care about what you want. I mean, I always think about when she tried to get everybody to move and to eat better in the schools, how people turned on her so quickly. So in some ways, the relief of not being the first lady is probably similar to not being the president, being able to say, you know what, I'm just going to wear jeans today and a T-shirt rather than wearing a Vera Wang dress for a Tuesday.
That's always been one of those weird positions in the political circles. I mean, even just as low down to the spouses of governors. It's like they do great things, but then the first lady of the state, they want her to have some, him or her to have some. Okay, well, you're now the first lady, the first person. Do something. What's your initiative that way? And it doesn't make sense because you're not. They're in an elected position. You're there because your spouse got elected. It's just like I remember. They made a big deal. When Kamala Harris's husband. It's like, well, what are they going to refer to him as? Well, the first man. That way because that sounds weird. Well, they refer to them as a first lady. It's just like so. I know it's not vice presidential level, but it's those things of the first lady's office is always weird because, okay, we don't want you to do something that way. Like Obama, her was the eat, move, and stuff, and they gave her a hard time that way. Well, you want her to be representative of something, but then you get upset when they do something differently.
Yeah, I always liked Laura Bush's initiative with reading.
Well, she was a teacher. That's where that came from.
Yeah.
Because there's always interesting one. And I don't, it's the ones that stand out there, good, bad, or indifferent. The ones you remember, like the no dare, just say no to drugs, was Nancy Reagan saying. I remember all those shirts we had in middle school or elementary school.
I did the DARE program, and there's the second one called Great. DARE was for everybody. Great were the kids who were at risk of joining gangs. I remember being like, they invited me to this great program, and I was like, baby, that's not a compliment. They said you need the part 2 to it, but I enjoyed those programs.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they were off base a little bit, but I still enjoyed the process of them. And I mean, it is like as a person as a spouse of somebody in a role like a state executive or the national executive, you can't go back to regular work, which is cool because Joe Biden did continue to teach at community colleges because she's a community college professor. So I thought that was a real cool message. But I mean, it's probably in some ways a little tiring to think like, man, now they have this amount of pressure on me to do something.
But also, too, knowing that both, Jill and President Biden are establishing their lives and their roles, it was hard to, okay, I'm now President and First Lady. I'm going to change my life because we are those titles and roles. No, they were establishing their lives so much that she was able to, hey, I'm going to still keep teaching and do the First Lady stuff that way.
Yeah.
So you're able to kind of do both. And I think it's great because the world we live in, you're expected to have multiple roles to be. If we were the pie in the sky, if we were the leader of the Democratic Party, who would be a good candidate for Vice President for Kamala Harris?
Well, we're in North Carolina. So Roy Cooper, I think
I have heard his name been kicked around because North Carolina being a swing state would be an interesting one.
well, North Carolina, not really a swing state anymore.
That's what they call it.
But
But I agree
Roy
with
Cooper
you.
winning two elections where Trump was on the ballot and won the state of North Carolina, which means people voted for Trump and Cooper together. I think that means maybe North Carolina can be back in play.
I have also heard his name and Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky.
Yeah, Andy Beshear is another strong candidate.
No,
I think the fear about Andy Beshear is if he becomes VP, could another Democrat win that
And see,
governor?
it'd be different if, like, Cooper's on his way out. I mean,
Yes.
he's done. He can't campaign anymore. So that's a natural progression. But with Beshear, he just got reelected last year. So it's like, I know he got elected once in 2019, so his 4-year term was up and got reelected in 23. But you're right, if you lose that spot, I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
that works. Does the legislative pick, that governor? Do they have a special runoff? I mean, I feel like usually in states like that, they have runoffs. They don't do just like somebody picks them.
Again, and I think this is the uniqueness of this situation. If they don't pick a VP until August, is there even enough time for a runoff? So then I think Roy Cooper becomes more attractive. So another
Yeah,
another
100%.
candidate who comes up is Josh Shapiro and Wes Moore. And again, they're young, energetic. Both of those guys are on the East Coast, so to balance some of that West Coast energy.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I'd love. I know you and I were texting yesterday. To me, it would be fantastic. Pete Buttigieg is fantastic. I think he'd be great. But as much as the United States were they prepared for African American president in 2008, I mean, I think their heads would explode if you have an African American one as be a president and a homosexual man being on the VP ballot. I think people's heads would explode.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend last week before the Biden thing happened, who was like, I just couldn't imagine a woman being president. And I told him in response, I was like, you do realize like 15 years ago, people were saying that about a black man being president. And I just can't wait for we can get to a day where we have progressed to a point where it's like, we're just looking for the person with the best character.
Oh yeah, regardless of what their
Yeah.
creed is, what their race is, what their religion, and
Yeah, so if it's a white dude, it's kind of interesting too because prior to the innovation of the television, FDR is a fantastic president with polio in a wheelchair. And you just think like, in this era, could you imagine that? And I'm like, man, we've gone backwards in so many ways where I'm like, just give us somebody who, I mean, the mistrust in our government currently, both sides. So give us a candidate who can just present America to the world in a way that we can feel like we can respect and believe what is being told to us.
yeah, it is interesting how that was a big deal when FDR was in the wheelchair fighting polio. They specifically didn't want to put him in a wheelchair, and they had asked the press to not put those out there because they didn't want that representation of a weak president because of illness. He wasn't weak because he physically couldn't do the job. He just was weak because of the illness he was afflicted with. And it's funny how now in this day and age, that's a big deal. How they want, that way. That's one of the tenets of the RNC is to knock Sleepy Joe because he's too old to do the job and stuff that way. Or even when Trump was campaigning, that one, making fun of the one reporter with,
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, but making fun of them out at a rally and stuff that way. So it's just it's unfortunate in this that they're all about just what gets like a lightning rod moment. I mean, it's
Yeah.
bad that it is that way, and I think that does kind of sort of lead to the mistrust of it that way because it's sleight of hand. You see one thing doing it, but they're explaining it this way, and it's just like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, and it does question the validity sometimes of their intentions of the government. Are they good? Are they bad? But because you see it one way and they don't explain what they're doing, and someone else makes up a representation, well, I think they're doing it like this. You believe that hype, you believe that lie, and you believe the lie long enough, you say it so many times it becomes the truth and stuff with that way. So it's interesting, just going back at, with the recent thing with, Trump when he got convicted in New York. Oh, that was a sham. It was a kangaroo court, and that was awful. But then when Hunter Biden got accused and he got convicted, well, yeah, justice was done. It was like, well, wait, it's the same federal system, judicial system that you're talking about. Well, he was convicted, he did those crimes. I said, but so was Trump. No, that was a kangaroo court. So you can't have it both ways. How can
Yeah.
you speak out of both sides of your mouth? But I think the way people are, you just are distrusting of your candidate's effect of it. If Trump he's going to get convicted, oh, it's a sham. They don't want to do it that way. But you get somebody, your political rival, then you praise it, you're all good for it that way. So you can't have it both ways, I would hope.
I mean, I think that's why, like that same point is why we talked about people being able to speak truth to you. And when I think about that VP role, whoever it is for Harris, it has to be like, so I think there's legitimate people today saying like Harris was such a supporter of Trump. I mean, of Biden. Look at me pulling that move. But such a supporter of Biden that on Friday and Saturday, she's like, I'm with Joe. And then Sunday, Joe pulls out and is like, well, he made the best decision for the country. Wait, just a day ago, you were so supportive. But when you were in the room and had an opportunity to speak truth, did you do it? And again, this makes me point to J.D. Vance as Trump's VP.
Oh, yeah.
Because
All the things he
automatically, the
said.
first thing you should think of is like, how many times in American history has the top of the ticket replaced the bottom of the ticket? So why is then Mike Pence the VP candidate again? Oh, because Mike Pence stood up to Trump.
That's why he didn't want to do it.
Yeah, so
you don't want to know.
not even not
yes,
wanting
man.
to do it, but Mike Pence has been written out of the MAGA history.
Oh yeah.
So like because he certified the election, which constitutionally he didn't have a choice to do.
Yeah, there's no way to change that.
He absolutely had to do it. He is now off the island, and you just go, man. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Mike Pence, but hopefully when you're selecting your VP, you're not just looking for a soldier who's going to follow orders, but you're going to look to somebody who is going to say, hey, Kamala, your decision about immigration wasn't great. How can we go forward with this process?
Yeah, you definitely want people who are going to push you to make the best decisions for yourself and the country, because you want them to see. You want them to give you perspective that you don't see because you're busy living the world that that you think it can be. But you want somebody, like you said, to keep you keep you within check, to tell you the way the world is. It does scare me a little bit about J.D. Vance at his age at 39. What kind of experience does he have? Yeah, I know he's only been a representative. Yeah, because he's not a senator, right?
He's a senator.
Oh, senator. Okay.
He's in his first term.
So you stop and think, what kind of, experience you have with that way. But in all fairness, I mean, Obama had only served, he was only one
He's
term.
in his first term too.
So it's like, you can't, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You can't really lob those, well, I don't know, J.D. Vance doesn't have experience. Well, Obama didn't either. But, he went on to, have him a good cabinet around him that, if he was going to do something he never dealt with, he'd lean on the cabinet member. Hey, tell me about this, Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State or whoever, to make good decisions to run the country. Help me with those things. And you hope people would be on that, Trump's cabinet who would do it that way. But I don't see that way. They're all about, just representing themselves and their own aspirations to do money or political stances or whatever they want to do and stuff.
So this is an excellent time as we get toward the end of this one for us to announce that Efren Renteria is running for president and Ellison Cooper is stepping up to be a vice president candidate.
If we're doing it that way, it would be the roles would be reversed.
No. I'm a vice president. I don't want to get assassinated. I need my earpieces.
That would be good. I mean, unfortunately, the job that I have wouldn't let me do that way. Many years ago, we had a lady once who worked with us. She was trying to be a mayor of a local city that we live in here in North Carolina, and she was going to be assuming the role after she retired. But for her to campaign for the job, she was still an active employee. And the people where I worked, they all had to take a vote, and it was like along their principal values. It was like 4-3 in favor of letting her do it because they were representing our organization, but she needed to be removed from the organization in some way. She's like, well, I'm not using our name to campaign. I'm using my name as a person, as a resident of this town to be the mayor. And they finally were like, well, if you win, you're going to be assuming office after you retire, so it's no big deal.
Did she win?
She did.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, she won. So it was one of those things and she really wanted to be the mayor of the town she lived in, but it was funny, that was almost derailed before it even got off the ground because of where she worked and stuff with it that way. It's like I was telling Cooper earlier, my wife wanted to run for local congressman here in town many years ago, and she thought about doing it, and I had to be honest with her. I said, well, with my job that I have, I can't support you, so I can't be there for you in those campaign events and stuff with that way. I said, I can be there after you win because I'm there in support of the office, not support of the candidate and stuff with that way. So it's like, it would be, and she was like, well, I wouldn't want to do it. I'd want you to be there with me because that's the whole point. I said, I'd love to be there with you, but because I can't, do it that way. I can't even put political signs in my yard to represent somebody. I can't put that way. And we had a friend of mine who works now with me. He had an Obama sticker from 2008 when he ran. He got hired in 2010 there with where we work, and there was so much uproar with other people who worked in that building because he parked in the parking garage. They made him take that sticker off of his car. He was no longer a candidate. He was the president, obviously, in 2010. But because to them, in their mind, they weren't allowed the opportunity to have political signs or affiliations or stickers or anything on their car, how come he was allowed to?
Wow.
I was like, they didn't even let me. He was grandfathered. He had a job. Doesn't matter. He's an employee now. He can no longer have it, so they made him take it off.
Man, I think it'd be sweet to be a city manager or a mayor. I mean, to get an opportunity to know your people.
Oh, that'd be cool.
No desire to ever be a president or a senator or even a governor, but a mayor. I think a mayor, people, I hope everybody votes, but your local officials have way more impact on your individual life than the president does.
Yeah, it's definitely taking a boulder to a pond opposed to a pebble for the ocean. It ain't going to make any effect. I've always said people who live at 1600 Pennsylvania have no effect on my daily life, but those people around us are local city officials, who go and do those things and whatnot that way. So, so again, like we started it earlier, that great Sam Cooke song, I hope you go out there and find it. Changes are going to come. It's been a long time coming, but that's how it is. I've always ever heard there's only certainties in life, death and taxes and change. Those are always going to be the three. They're always going to be happening, doing something with that way. I hope you have a great summer vacation. Rate, review, subscribe, enjoy the podcast. Hopefully you have and had a great time with it. This is your host, Efren and
Ellison.
See you next time.
Deuce.